Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another SixyTimes Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today we are looking at third order strategies. Specifically, what most people will call autopilot. When you're playing any fighting game, there's a certain thing that we call the first order strategy, the thing that you, or depending on your playstyle, opponent want to do, and if you stood there and did nothing about it, they would keep doing. Or did minimal about it, let's say, because doing nothing will obviously make people do whatever they feel like. But if they think you're playing seriously, they'll keep on trying to do thing A, because it's the most damaging, or the most comfortable, or the best thing for their character to do. By most standards. Safest, most damage. There's different reasons for things being treated as the first order strategy, but most people who play these games are familiar with the concept at least. And the second order strategy generally being whatever makes that either continue working or not work. So if someone has a first order strategy of running up to you and throwing, and you counter it by poking them, then a second order strategy generally comes out of that. No need to play neutral. A third order strategy is of course one step beyond this. It is what happens when you both are aware that you can't just keep on using the first order ones. So, in this case, a third order strategy is basically the thing you expect to be able to do because of already understanding how the first and second order interact. Your opponent punches, you move to a specific space. You do this over and over and over until your opponent kicks. And then you do something else. Your opponent's kick is the second order strategy. Your third order strategy is not stopping the kick, because they don't do the kick unless they think the punch isn't going to work. It's an entirely different thing having to do with positioning, most of the time. And some understanding of your opponent's mindset, which is usually where most people fall short, and it takes a while to get good enough at fighting games to think, oh, my opponent wants to do this right now, out of their main options. They've got 1 and 2, and your third order strategy is preventing one of those two things from happening while minimizing the other one. In this case, for example, Hitomi and Diego can fight at longish range, and Hitomi will be left with only one good option. Now, Diego doesn't want to fight at long range. Diego wants to fight close up. But it's harder to win out against that for Hitomi. He can't just get in. If she comes to him, fine. Do what you want, because now Diego's first order strategy becomes possible. But when Hitomi is far away, Diego will not be able to very easily get there. How do you resolve this? Well, Hitomi can only hit a certain number of things to stop Diego from coming toward her that actually bother Diego. That's the important thing. It's not, can you avoid getting hit ever? Because that's impossible. These games would be really boring. But you can avoid taking a lot of damage. Hitomi's punches at long range do way more damage than her kicks. She does have good kicks that get knockdowns, but she really would prefer to punch you. And since there's very unlikely that you'll get a really long range low punch from this character, or a particularly long range high punch, Diego has a relatively simple concept of this. I'm going to walk up, and if I think you're actually going to hit a button, I'm going to mid-hold punch. Simple enough.
I ain't gonna lose.
Now, this isn't a first order strategy. It isn't, my opponent is always going to punch and therefore I'm always going to hold. You have to read the feeling, because the whole point was, if your opponent was punching all the time, that would be their first order strategy, and you wouldn't care about whether or not you should hold, you would just hold all the time. But if you're decent at understanding this game, you know that Hitomi's first order strategy isn't necessarily, I'm going to punch you constantly, or at least not that particular one. Mainly because the punch is telegraphed. She needs you to commit to something, to think about something else long enough for her to get that punch to work. Because if you just walk up to her and she does her big charge punch, you can actually react with the hold, which is kind of the point. Because you can actually react with the hold, it works well as a third order strategy. You can move to the correct position, and with some practice and the priming, you walk to that spot, you expect your opponent to go for the punch, they do it, and you manage to hold the punch. If you don't expect them to punch, they probably will get away with punching. If you were doing your normal thing, and you walked up to them and didn't expect the punch, and your opponent went, "You're being very brave, who do you think you are?" and punches you, most likely you won't hold it. It's just the way time tends to work for most players until they're very practiced. And when you're very practiced, you're not really thinking of the game in terms of these steps anyway. But as we aren't all very practiced at this game yet, we still have to build from the bottom. Now, since Bayman has a bit more range, but slower moves, Hitomi's option here is often to either get a knockdown and then close in, because Bayman is nowhere near as good at close combat as Diego is. A lot more predictable, a lot less powerful, a lot less able to keep the opponent from getting into a particular state, etc. So Hitomi's first order strategy in here is, oh, I'm going to get close to you and make myself advantaged enough that you can't do anything because your moves are slightly slower than other people, or they don't hurt me that much when you're doing them. And if Hitomi gets close enough to Bayman, she can get some good damage, and she can get some good mix-ups. Fortunately, she's not an overwhelming pressury mix-up character, so Bayman still has a chance at that point. But if she lands a combo and knows what she's doing, you can end up in some really bad situations as Bayman. She gets close, she hits a button, and you're in trouble. The interesting thing for our Hitomi player is actually that she's not so much a pressury player normally. Despite playing very dominant characters, she doesn't often take advantage of this to just hit buttons forever and get away with it. This tends to freak out higher level players, but tends to mean that the matches with lower level players are a bit more normal. And why you'd see, for example, oh, I'm holding at this point, or I'm getting in and going for things that aren't just hitting the fastest button I've got until you have to block me forever. Hitomi has a fair amount of what we call evasive hitboxes, basically moves that prevent her from taking a certain type of damage while she's doing them, and win out in the range department. But they can be a little hard to use under that principle. So this match doesn't really need to get past the first and second order strategies yet. We may see that later on in stream. That said, for each character, at least in most neutral or pressure situations, there is a legitimate main option. A thing you care about learning to do the most, the fastest, in order to make this work. Honoka, for example, deals well with other people trying to kick her. Many kicks are high, and when they aren't, they're kind of slow often. Faster kick characters might manage if they have good range, but overall, she can throw you if she expects you to do a high, similar to the Diego holding Hitomi thing. But this doesn't mean her first option is to do that. Her first option is usually to kick you to get an opening to start a combo. If you make a mistake, she will kick you. If you get too close, she will kick you. If you drop your guard because you're trying to sidestep, you might manage to get away if you keep sidestepping because it doesn't track very well. But generally, if you're in neutral, Honoka wants to kick you. Or block. And you can see why. Once she's close enough, or you've decided to come right up to her, it's a little bit easier to deal with. And she's a character who's good at dealing with situations after blocking because she has some nice quick normals nearby and a lot of good ways to keep those going into combos, and to, if you think you're gonna like trick her, a lot of her moves just get right through the trick. It's just, okay, I don't care what you're going to do. I am going to feel this out and just do a thing, and you're the one in trouble. So you'll see this general style of I'm blocking, I'm looking for my opening, or I'm going to kick you. So you can see in this match, our Hitomi player's main option is don't let the kick happen. There's definitely some buttons Hitomi can hit that minimize the risk of damage from this kick. And this match, therefore, ends up going into the third order strategy. Honoka wants to kick, but it probably won't work. Hitomi cares about the kick and has to play around it, but won't necessarily spend a lot of time actually getting kicked. We're talking about the mid kick being used there. But it doesn't necessarily make sense given the number of good options Honoka has to go, I'm going to hold a mid kick every time. Because she has a lot of kicks. The mid kick is the main starter best one, but we're talking about range often more than we're talking about the button. So if Honoka wants to kick because it's a good range to kick from, every other button she has at that range is still useful and is still basically a mix-up. People don't call them mix-ups in neutral because they're really not. But it's attempting to open you up by hitting one of many options at the same range that aren't all stopped in the same way. From there, therefore, we got to see some of Honoka's third order strategy. But Honoka is a complicated enough character that I'm not going to try to explain it based on that one. It's easier to explain in a different matchup where they're not dancing around and both have a lot of options. But just note that we did get there. And therefore now we're going to move on because this is our loser stays on lobby. Functionally, US East Coast, we treat it as Atlantic Rim. If you live anywhere on the Atlantic Rim or even a little bit further into Europe or the US, you probably will have good connections to most players, assuming that you have good enough internet. If you don't have great internet, you're better off somewhere on the eastern seaboard of America. Feel free to join in. But you can try from anywhere, just don't hang around too much if the lag is bad, because it is loser stays on and we can't do anything about it.
A ninja? A real?
This matchup is similar. Ayane wants to kick and generally wants to stay relatively far away. And Diego generally doesn't want to be very far away. But Diego can't really approach by hitting buttons because most likely they're just going to get whiff punished by things Ayane does. Getting close enough is also a good time for Diego to go for throws because just the way Ayane's defense works means that you're better off landing the throw than trying to hit her, going into a long block string and then getting caught in a big hold or Ayane combo. At close range, if you end up having to block, she'll probably break your guard. She's not a straightforward enough character that you don't have to worry about that. But Diego has some of the longer punishes in the game, meaning that she doesn't have a great set of offense against Diego either. And there we see the third order strategy appear. Ayane, knowing that Diego shouldn't hit a lot of buttons to keep her out, and is more likely to try to get in more so for the concept of throws than to land a big combo anyway, can stay out of range until Diego is not thinking about that and throws Diego herself. This is a long road technically because there's a lot of having to discourage Diego from doing certain things to stop the throw, run up, using long buttons, and those don't do a lot of damage, so technically there's not a lot of reason for Diego to care and could more or less keep on hitting the buttons. Getting thrown is a bigger deal in most situations. But in terms of how do we stop this from being a threat to Diego, mostly it's high hold. Ayane has buttons that bother Diego slightly that aren't high holds. But in terms of your mindset, you don't care enough. You just high hold most things, and the really reactable ones are harder to deal with because they're mid holds, but they're like forward mid holds, and that's a pain. But overall, the throw doesn't do a ton of damage, whereas Diego's throw will hit Ayane fairly hard. And he can sidestep out of the way of or do a lot of other things. And eventually, what will happen is that Ayane will think too hard about getting that hit and Diego will punch her. Like that. So you're seeing the third order strategy play out, and this is standardly how most people experience fighting games. Things are happening, they have a decent idea of why certain things are happening, and are happy when specific things go specific ways. That's about it. When you're not practiced at a game, when you're not pushing high in the mastery level, this is pretty much fine. This is not even like, oh, there's definitely people that will go, well, that's not playing the game at your optimum, but it's really not important to do so in that way. At first, you have to understand all of the little nuances that your opponents might pull up to get past this stage. But if you can't get to this stage, then most of the time you spend playing the game feels like you're not doing anything at all, and you don't understand what's happening. We appear to have one additional person, but this is Wi-Fi to the other end, so we don't know what's going to happen here in terms of lag. I expect it to be bad. It's often bad, but their Wi-Fi was very high level, so let's see what happens. We've discussed the Kasumi versus Ayane matchup before. This has a lot to do with range of kicks. And still, the run-up throw does come in a lot. In fact, I'd say that's the third order strategy for this match. Holds are not really part of this matchup at this level. Mainly because both of them tend to try to hit each other from so far away that they're more so thinking about spacing, not committing too hard to approaching or retreating, so that they can let's say with punish, get a couple extra hits in. And it takes very long because, as noted on many streams before, when Ayane gets an opening, Kasumi takes a lot of damage, and Kasumi doesn't really create a lot of damage situations on Ayane, but she can keep Ayane from getting to hers for a long time. Holds therefore are difficult because they both have so many options that there's really no way to tell what's going to happen. You can't choose to hold well enough. But as long as Kasumi keeps hitting buttons while Ayane is far away, and chooses the right buttons, nothing is going to happen because Ayane can't hold those buttons, generally due to range, but she also can't get closer fast enough. Kasumi moves generally propel her forward too much. Their hitboxes are too far forward for Ayane to manage to fill the space before getting hit by the attack. But as you can see from that, Kasumi's damage in this situation is generally poor. And that is where the throw game comes in. They both need it, but the situation under which they use it is different. Ayane throws Kasumi when she has hit buttons, pushed herself physically forward, and gotten into Ayane's throw range. And Ayane just loses her longest range throw, and it whiff punishes. Kasumi throws Ayane when she tries to get Kasumi opened up, when she's waiting for a moment or has overcommitted to a particular attack, and there's a gap. It's easier to throw, because you can't tell necessarily what height Ayane will be at in order to make sure you're hitting the right thing. But as the Ayane player, you can note that Santier can actually be fairly quiet about this. But yes, I know you're going to hit me forever, sister. I understand. You can never stop hitting buttons. It's fine. And then eventually do like half damage and get them back to even. That patience is relatively required for the matchup from the Ayane side, simply because Kasumi really doesn't do a lot of damage at this level of play by just sticking out buttons and hoping that you run into them. She definitely has some good mix-ups, and if she is trained enough as a player, the player is trained enough, you can get certain things to hit fairly hard. But the buttons that are good for keeping Ayane at that space don't generally combo all that well, and even the conversions when you have them aren't so great. You can see a lot of it here. Kasumi continues to hit buttons, but Ayane is not really getting hurt by the fact that these are happening. In close quarters, you get better combos, but even those are still not the greatest. Running up to Ayane is generally not an easy way to win this, but it could work out. The problem is that you might get grabbed and thrown on your way in, which is just as bad. But you can see how, by using the hold to continually keep the opponent thinking, you can keep hitting buttons, I'll keep trying to hold you. The buttons they hit, unless it's on reaction to the hold, don't really help. It's just as if Ayane tried to get in on you. So if you are the Ayane player and you want to hold a couple times against someone who is not going to go, oh, you held, great, now I can actually do my big combo, bye. You can try it, but you will eventually meet someone who does that, and you won't want to do it for long. Bayman versus Hitomi from a different angle. Let's see what we get. So we're talking the basic first order strategy again. Hitomi is very close. Hitomi is hitting buttons. It can be strong for Hitomi to use some of her stun buttons, because they are slower, but if the other player has been convinced to worry about the fast ones, you get to use the slower ones, and the slower ones open for better combos. That said, they're almost all mid-punches. Therefore, you could just hold mid-punch. But, remember the other side of this. Hitomi manages well if she can get the knockdown and then use that to get in close, meaning that there's a certain kick that is really useful here. It's relatively easy to see though. Blocking, punch, 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 punch forever. And then found the perfect timing where the opponent thinks, okay, you probably have to stop doing that, and then did something else. But Bayman's moves are generally too slow to just go, I'm going to have a serious match-off with you as a character. Hitomi gets to keep hitting buttons a lot, more so by faith than anything else. A lot of them are holdable, a lot of them are troublesome. Only if you don't know that they're holdable. But she has other options. She has lots of close-range kick options. What she doesn't have is the ability to keep hitting buttons forever, because she will eventually get into a part of the string that you get to do this to, and it gets hard from there. You can see the opponent almost immediately switching to kicks as a result of it, just to make you go, alright, I can't always just mid-hold everything. Break hold is a good idea, and can help a lot, but in this case it doesn't seem to have helped directly. And you see a little fourth order there, basically going, well, I know you're expecting me to wake up and punch so that I have to hit buttons. But that one's reactable, because if the player decided, I'm going to wait for you to get up and punch, and you started to try to throw them, if you've trained enough, you will tech the throw, so it's fine. Getting caught into the concept of I should throw this character because I can't do much else is a big problem for Bayman, because otherwise Hitomi really can just stick there. It's not that there are no gaps in her moves, but it's you can't be sure how big the gap is, and therefore don't know which of your own to use. She also has enough low-ish movements that you could have problems just using your high punch really fast. But you can see Bayman's moves end up relatively slow. A lot of the things he could do when his really situation is bad is just super, but it's not overwhelmingly good as an option because his super is fairly holdable, and also if the player decided to just block, they'll just block. Still, if you've gotten into the state where you think your opponent is convinced that they can keep on hitting buttons forever, super becomes a good option because they don't always get to do this. Seems like the Wi-Fi is in fact strong, and it was probably a distance thing before, so we can expect another match of that level. It seems as if they're going back to Kasumi maybe though? They might do it by matchup, I guess. Nope, back to Kasumi. obviously we have a fair amount of experience with this matchup because this is Omni Rabbit versus me, and while we don't play this game against each other very often, we have a really strong understanding of things the other does from many, many other games. This game is no exception. Both of these characters are more or less trying to kick each other. But Kasumi is at a minor disadvantage because a lot of her better kicks are high kicks that Honoka can just go through with a particular move of hers. So at a certain range, Kasumi's better off not trying to keep Honoka away, but rather just, okay, I am now going closer in to hit more buttons. This helps quite a lot in the matchup because Honoka doesn't have a lot of really good responses to Kasumi doing this. She's technically better off going for an attack before any of that to prevent Kasumi from ever getting that close, and that means it somewhat deactivates her ability to beat the high kick in that way. This is a thing that comes up in fighting games really often, in fact. Whether or not you do a certain part of your strategy has to do with whether you have advantage or not, if you're the one advancing or not. There's no benefit to Honoka in letting Kasumi get close so that she can then try to beat a high kick, or to dance around in neutral and hope that the high kick will happen. Not at the start. Honoka has to show that she has enough ability to win out in neutral in close range consistently, to then make Kasumi think, okay, I'm going to try neutral instead because this close range thing is not working. And at that point, then you get to use the hop. Kasumi can also attempt mid-kicks, but on the other hand, most of the time the thing she wants out of the mid-kick is actually more so to get another opening, to get a position and a situation where she has advantage, she can hit another button, and because she has so much variance in the buttons, Honoka doesn't get to choose what happens next. She will probably just get thrown. There is a solution to this from Honoka's side though. Specifically, break hold will stop the entire problem. If you're taking damage from Kasumi at that range, and she just keeps on hitting buttons, the break hold that Honoka can use is among her better options. She doesn't have to worry about being held out of it, she doesn't have to worry about other things, she doesn't have to worry about the range. Just whenever things get bad, you've been kicked a little bit and started to get thrown around, you break hold, because if, for a moment, as you just saw, Kasumi decides, I'm not doing anything, I'm going to wait for this to be over, you've still gotten it. And because of the way these two characters interact, the amount of time they spend hitting and blocking each other, Honoka will be able to break hold really often. But Kasumi doesn't get that much out of punishing the break hold. She has to be completely thinking, this is the moment you're going to break hold, therefore. But if Kasumi could easily predict when the opponent would think to break hold, then it would probably mean that the opponent was easily able to predict what strings Kasumi was going to use. It goes back and forth all the time. Kasumi is relying on the fact that I'm going to hit different buttons at different timings to confuse you a lot. I am going to be random, and if you show someone else that you're capable of being random, they generally won't be able to feel out when you plan to counter their randomness. You're randomly feeling on either side. But it looks like that player has gotten their 3 matches and heading out, so onward. Tina versus Elliot happens primarily because, one, the way Hitomi and Elliot interact is much, much slower, and I feel as if Just Fine is going a little more high octane today. And secondarily, because the way Tina uses her whiff punish options is entirely different. Hitomi's whiff punish options all put the opponent far away, which is Elliot's basically better situation. Tina's do this, but they do it in a different way and usually give you a chance to catch up with your own movement. If you've watched Rainbow Mika fight, you have a fairly good idea of what's going on here. Corner guard, footsies, concepts of I am now able to do things that you can stop, but there's a cost to you for stopping them. So there's a big difference between, for example, a character that knocks the opponent far away when they whiff punish, and one that gets to go, okay, no, you're staggered a little bit, and even though I don't necessarily have a follow-up to this stagger, I haven't given you your optimal position on screen. This also helps with things like getting the opponent to the corner or the back of the stage, because in Tina's case, mostly the opponent must walk away so as not to get caught in a continual loop of stagger buttons. We can see therefore that Elliot's style shifts. If I can't zone you, now I have to use long range attacks and come in. And I have to try to get you from my max range. But now Tina has lots of good options to stop that, and most of them don't take damage from things Elliot does, except that punch. So she can decide, okay, if I think I'm not going to make it, I'm going to hold mid-punch. This is only when she's trying to get in, mostly. If she thinks Elliot is coming to her, she does a different thing. If she thinks, I'm going to try to get in and Elliot's going to eventually wait for me, it may seem like going back to the previous, where it's trying to deal with zoning, but it's not really that. Because she is entering footsie range with the intention of poking at a character who was at long range and is now trying to get closer, as opposed to one that is at long range and trying to stay there. This one is actually fairly complicated, and I'm kind of regretting even talking about it, but it's still probably worth looking at if you can understand parts of it. Elliot is a disadvantage enough at close range, because you can see she can keep on doing this. Eventually she'll take some damage, but it's really not a lot. It takes a long time for Elliot to chip her down this way, and Tina can just do about that much damage in one throw at her. Since almost all of Elliot's kicks that actually do anything in this situation are mid kicks too, and the punch is the only thing you have to worry about, you could just mid-hold forward nearly all of it once you figure the opponent has switched to that mental state. One strength we've talked about before though is that Cosmic Wolf has almost unshakable mental states. You cannot discourage the player from doing things. It will just be every time it works, it will be reinforced that it is working, regardless of how many times you actually stop it, or how much thinking you can do that makes you think, well, they're going to stop eventually. No. That is not going to happen. And there are players who benefit from this a lot in many games. The idea that, yeah, you won't do it the fourth time. No, they will. Shoutouts to Combo Fiend. Now we have two characters that mostly want to throw each other a lot, and this leads to a lot of throw teching that happens. The third order strategy is therefore, after the throw tech, what should I do? And the only rule here is that Diego shouldn't hit any buttons. In fact, the oddest thing is that Diego should usually try to throw again, but mostly on reaction. So if they have a throw interaction where one of them doesn't come out on top, where the throw is teched and neither one gets to throw, other than that you can just watch this as a big wrestling slam fest because they will absolutely do that all day. But if they did get to the point where there was a matter of, I can't get to throw you, you keep on attacking me, Tina cares about hitting the right button. Diego cares about hitting the right throw. With punishing Tina's buttons with throws is difficult, and generally Diego should just kick. But Diego should just kick for most of this matchup, so it's really not that relevant. You can see already that there's much less button hitting and much less moving around. Sorry, much more moving around. Mainly because, okay, I'm trying to get you to give me an opening to get close enough to grab you. When I say which kick Diego needs, which throw Diego needs, it's often a matter of crouching versus standing. And Diego's crouching throws don't have the greatest range. But Tina tends to move herself into the position to get caught by them, so there's always that to consider. Basically, I'd say pick randomly from the Diego side, because you don't know at any point where Tina's height is going to be. And technically, the Tina player might not know either. What makes this difficult is the consistent change between I'm with punishing from throw with kick, and I'm with punishing a kick with a throw. But whiff punishes are something you train separately over time. That said, we didn't end up with any throw techs, so depending on your tendencies, whether or not you're a defensive player or an offensive one, you might find that the whiff punishes end up being more important than the post-throw game. But again, since those need to be trained so much, it's a little easier to think in terms of, here is a set situation, I don't know what to do here, my instinct would be to hit a button, I shouldn't hit a button. And that brings us full circle back to this matchup. So I will probably have much less to say. We are reaching that point of stream where I've said a lot of things for like an hour. I will probably dial it back somewhat. But you can mostly watch based on what's before, and I may repeat some points. In this case, once again, Diego mostly wants to throw Ayane or get in close, and sometimes still throw Ayane, but mostly. Punching does work, but overall, changing Ayane's mindset toward doing things from further and then holding mid-kick, or generally getting out of the way, and with punish throwing, is a stronger option than most things. Ayane then would want to fight from further away, but it doesn't necessarily do enough damage that Diego cares. Once further away, Diego normally cares more so about either reacting with a mid-hold, if the move seems like it'd be really long, mid-kick hold, which is forward hold, or high hold when flinching, and the hard part here is physical. One of those is the opposite directionality to the other. High hold is up back, and mid hold for kicks is forward. So it's not super easy to get across. As we continually mention on streams, please note that most spinning attacks that flip downward or upward or whatever tend to be mid-kick holds for various reasons, which makes it even more stressful. Ayane therefore will go for the, okay, you are stressed out by knowing you have to worry about all my different holds, so I will get at least some chances to walk forward or run forward and throw you. Honestly, it makes Diego's job a little easier because moving to the right spacing is easier still. Going forward is good. Going sidestep is also good. Using super is helpful. But overall, if Ayane is planning to play zoning, you should probably not do anything.
Don't make me laugh.
Because at that point, she becomes easy enough to whiff punish with the heavy punches, or if you're worried that that won't work, once again, don't do anything. This is a common thing that comes up with players in this game. The feeling that you must get in on an opponent who is choosing to do nothing is strong in many fighting games, but this game in particular, because whereas in other games, when you're told this character is a zoner, you have the expectation that they're going to try to get to the other end of the screen and stay away from you, and you have to do it. You have to get in because you can't reposition sideways to change the... You can't change the distance that the corner is from this person by doing anything. In DOA and such games, you do have some options for changing the orientation of a zoner character or zoner player relative to a wall. And this is an important thing to think about when you find yourself facing someone who refuses to do much other than zone you.
Are you here to take me out? What I need is strength. Done with you.
What we see here is a large part of Elliot's capacity to do supplemental damage. This is a thing that zoners often use because of people just being so unused to them getting in. Or aiming to get in, even more so. The good thing is that a lot of them actually have some fairly good options at those spaces, and usually so many of them that you don't have a good way to choose how to hold them or defend. In Elliot's case, it's obviously not something that does a lot of damage, but he does have a lot of options to keep on poking at you and making you uncomfortable at the closeness, and ability to stop you from specifically being able to do anything. This then leads into a combo that sends you flying, probably, and recreates Elliot's optimal situation. Since you're expecting that you don't get to move while trying to walk into this character, it leaves Elliot free to do that instead. And it's pretty frustrating to spend too much of your time trying to keep a zoner out. Even if it takes forever for them to kill you that way because of their lower damage, it still gets to you sometimes. It gives them a lot of freedom and eventually makes you likely to try to get in on them, whereas they're probably trained themselves mentally to the point where they will automatically stop you and the zoning will work. Not all zoner characters are actually given the ability to do this well, but in most good games lately, they all have it. They're often granted it lately as a form of balance, so if you're a Street Fighter player, Dalsim has been given this recently. Because Dalsim before really didn't do any close range damage or have too many complicated mix-ups. Now, good luck. This is different from characters who are good at space control as a generality and could hit you from anywhere. The difference between a zoner and a space control character is that normally a space control character, while still a zoner functionally, can attack anywhere on the screen. But this doesn't even apply in this game, so you should expect that it's going to be very similar. You saw in a matchup with Tina that one of your better options is to find an attack height or way of movement that prevents Elliot's longer range attacks on approach from actually hitting you and whiff punishing them or just ending up in a scramble. Sidestepping is generally effective as most characters that have large charging moves don't actually manage to get tracking on those moves. That's related to like just someone like Kasumi and pretty much no one else. So sidestepping or being in the mind state that you must sidestep and therefore expect this thing and therefore will punch it is really helpful. That said, if your spacing is off or your opponent's taking too long to do a specific thing, there are a lot of moves that take so long to animate that they're technically tracking. It's very difficult to explain that in this game, but you can definitely see it on Elliot's mid-kick. There's a lot of, I am going to sidestep now, but Elliot's takes so long to do this kick that you often get hit anyway. The answer to this is not straightforward, because that's not the strongest kick. It's more so annoying than strong. Do you choose to ignore it or try to hold it? That's up to you, really. But in terms of the strategy of it, it still works out fine. Oh no, something froze. We had this problem multiple weeks in a row, I think, actually. I wonder if it's just this time of day that this happens, and we end up restarting the stream often. But will it be an entire death of the session? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. We'll be back, of course, if it happened yet again, and we'll probably try to figure out what is they're doing at 8 o'clock on every Thursday that causes that. But for now, let's see if it connects up this time. It's certainly allowing for character selection on this side, so maybe it'll work out. Hitomi's best option in this matchup for nearly everything Ayane does, to the point where it might as well be her first order strategy instead of any offense or defense, is uppercutting. Ayane is the one that has to worry about this. She is never in a position to block the uppercut, and technically, it's the equivalent of that one person in 2D games that keeps on jumping in on you and you keep on doing the game's equivalent of Shoryuken. Yeah, it's that bad. Now, of course, if you manage to do the right thing at the right spaces, or run up and block, or even run up and hold, you may get some advantage out of this on
This is your last chance to run away.
Ayane's side. But basically, yeah, Hitomi should just uppercut all the time. Because the amount of damage that will be done by anything on Ayane's side that discourages the uppercut is way smaller than the damage that Hitomi gets out of doing the uppercut. Hitomi gets control out of the uppercut as well. And as you can see, Ayane is like, oh yes, I hit you, but do I care? As the Hitomi player, how much do I care that you did that? All that happens is that you spend a lot more time hitting each other, which means that you build up more meter, which means that things get harder even for Ayane, because she's not going to get to use her break hold as much as Hitomi will. Trying to move in faster, somewhat helpful. Hitting with super decent, but Hitomi is kind of like tough, so she doesn't care about that as much either. There's a good option, but unfortunately at a certain timing, even that is beaten by the uppercut. So you have to dance around at long range and hope that it works out. The other reason why this works out well is because there's nearly no situation in which Hitomi has to worry about what happens after she does the uppercut. There's not a lot of focus that needs doing. All it does is make Ayane's job harder because she has to think up more ways of getting through things, most of which Hitomi just reacts to. Now normally, she doesn't get to use this button in most matchups because it's relatively close range, it's relatively whiff punishable, and if you tried to use it in most of the situations where you were the one trying to move forward with the hit, you would fail. It doesn't reach far enough, most people will backstep or sidestep out of it, but when facing an opponent who tries to move toward you a lot and tries to mess with your structure of how to block and defend a lot, it helps immensely. You are coming to me, I don't know exactly what you're going to do, but this will handle most of it. What makes this worse for Ayane's side is that if Hitomi does just block some of this stuff, she's still advantaged, making the rolling throw one of your better options as a generality. At that range, it therefore helps to have that sort of mix-up. Ayane stands a little closer, and instead of getting to use any of her really good ranged moves, basically she can't zone here. She has to do her running stuff, she has to do other things at a range that's slightly closer, and hope she can do enough damage. And that brings us to the third order strategy. Ayane no longer has a good reason to use most of those options, and she will just stop. Judging when just stop has happened from the Hitomi side and when you no longer need or get to use the uppercut much is the important thing here.
How is my fighting? Wanna do it again?
And that is by generally our definition third order strategy, when the first two things could stop happening in a match entirely, but that one can't. If the first two things went away, the thing that replaces it, the thing that is done because they exist but aren't being used right now, is the third order. But we are now back to Ayane versus Bayman, and probably not much to say about it. I didn't say a lot before, but we've covered this one extensively on other streams. Not necessarily that it helps if I send you to watch those, but it's relatively easy to look through what happens and understand this matchup at a core level. It's similar to the Hitomi uppercut thing somewhat, but Bayman gets a lot more out of Ayane failing to get in because of a block. Therefore, the situation is even more advantaged to Bayman on that front. I'm not bothering to keep you out, or I'm just going to block you because I think you are trying to get around me and then throw, and that's it. Ayane mostly deals with this by not playing the zoning style at all. Sidestepping and using basic kicks is a lot stronger, but it does put her in the Kasumi situation. I can hit you a lot, but I can't hurt you a lot. This is why the sidestepping and heavy control of range ends up being so important. But fortunately for Ayane, she has entire sidestep buttons. Still, our Ayane player often plays her enough in a zoning tick that you do have to keep that in the back of your mind. Don't chase because that's what's being waited for. It's a lot easier to just deal with Ayane's stuff when she's coming at you, even if it feels hard to react to. The other option is not going to be better, because it's a mental state change that you're suffering through. We've discussed many times on many streams of other games how difficult it is to deal with someone who is basically running from you. And it's doubly important on any rush-down character who wants you to be close but is going to try to convince you that they don't, temporarily, so that you get into their space on your own. You should be thinking about how long you can stay away from them, even if they have decided to stay away from you. Because unless the round timing is getting very close to the end, or in the case of a character with less damage output, like 20 seconds I guess, unless you're around there, you don't care at all that they're far away. That is precisely where you wanted them the entire time, so it's fine to just leave things. And here's why. It's a little more telegraphed most of the time because the range they end up moving to is actually harder to attack from. Maintaining yours without committing to approach leaves you with much better reaction options. As soon as you've committed to getting in on the opponent, most of us, until we get much better at these games, can't then switch to instantly reacting to a button and stopping something. So you have to be pretty careful with it. But we're again back to Diego versus Ayane, the throw fest. Ayane once again looking for moments when Diego is not willing to hit buttons because hitting buttons doesn't help, to make it all the way in and grab. Diego knowing that hitting buttons doesn't help, but that Ayane can't just run up and grab every time. She has to do other things in order to make hitting buttons a bad enough idea that she can do it. The third and first order strategies can often seem to rotate around. The only reason we generally say that the first order strategy is the first order is because if you tell a complete newbie to this game or fighting games in general how a character works, and they press some buttons and a certain thing happens, that's the thing they latch onto. And even that is sort of statistical. There are some people for whom the third order strategy is the first thing they think of doing, but usually not. So you give someone Ayane who has a lot of flips, a lot of acrobatics, a lot of long moves and flying kicks, and they've for some reason chosen that this character is interesting. Their first thought in the Diego matchup is not, oh, I should run up and throw now because that's the most important thing to me. They go for all of their acrobatics. If you give a Diego player, just generally Diego, their idea is not, maybe I should wait here and defend. No, they punch things. You can probably suggest to them that they should also throw things. But the actual, okay, I'm going to play this form of defense isn't the first thing they think of. Because it's the nature of the character. You didn't pick Diego unless you probably didn't pick Diego unless your idea was, I want to punch things. And if you've watched Diego played in other situations, even if you got random selected into Diego, unless you have a built-up style from some other character, and decide, I don't care that I'm playing Diego, I'm going to play my style, you're probably still going to punch things. But it is important to realize that you can probably, especially if the third order strategy sounds more to you like your own character style once you've worked it out, it might be the first thing you want to do. The interchangeability, though, is fairly standard across games. One of them is preventing the other from happening, and sometimes vice versa. And that's the only thing that's making the decision for you. In terms of the first and third, it's mostly these two things are related because one allows the other to work. Either by itself will just get countered every time. Combine the two in order to have an actual chance at offense. It's still mostly just a chance, but it's still there.
I have no time for games.
One of Diego's biggest problems in this matchup is the fact that Honoka has variability in her string timing. Unlike Kasumi, she doesn't also have variability in range and height as much, but if you're counting on timings to get you out of problems against this character, you're not going to do well. She also is fairly hard to grab because she tends to attack from near max range. So what is a punchy person to do? For the most part, Diego actually is better served by walking backward out of everything. In fact, tapping backdash or blocking for longer is often more helpful than not. More situations occur where Diego gets to play punching and throws and so on from trying to stay at the edge of her range and just accepting her attack strings than anything else. It's hard to tell because obviously if you haven't played a game a lot, you don't know if your opponent ever really has to stop. And technically Honoka doesn't have to stop, but she gets nothing out of it if she doesn't. Her lows are not necessarily reactable, but not the greatest help. And her other moves that tend to mess with people's ranges don't do anything at the range that she can mess with you at. So she's more or less counting on you to get frustrated at the fact that she can keep on hitting buttons at that specific range forever and try to stop her. But it's not in your best interest to do that. If you understand the hold situation well enough, you might get through something, but you generally won't because she can at least decide if to punch or kick. And she does have a couple high kicks that you can ignore because they don't do enough damage really. The key to understanding this is to know that characters who are like Honoka specifically, the player playing them tends to get bored of just you blocking them indefinitely. And it often makes them feel as if they're doing something wrong, because the idea that you could just defeat them by blocking forever is frustrating because it makes them feel, well, what am I supposed to do here? This is particularly troublesome once you have a life lead, even not a very big one because of the amount of time it takes for Honoka to chip it down. But as you can see, responding to Honoka hitting buttons or the end of her strings by hitting your own buttons eventually leads to bad situations. What you're counting on against characters like this is that eventually, unless they keep on repeating the exact same string over and over, there is somewhere in their string that they have enough pushback that it really is your turn. They can either keep on doing punch, 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 punch for 10 seconds straight, or they can try for something else, and often the something else, assuming that you were punched a lot, might put you at a spacing where you get to do something. Not always, and you have to watch for it. It's not as simple as, okay, they kicked, now it's my turn. It is usually, you don't have to watch what they're doing at all. You block and watch the character's feet. And when they're far enough apart that you think, oh, maybe it's my chance now, then you do something. It can be frustrating, especially if you're playing a character that you like to get to do things, to just block, 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 block forever. But I can tell you that it's normally rewarding in the sense that you get to hit really big buttons sometimes as a result of the pushback part. And because your opponent doesn't really know which thing they're going to get hit with, they generally can't hold it. In other games, they tend to block them. In this game, you could, but there's always a chance that something will go horribly wrong at that point. And most of the time, if you're hitting your longest buttons at a good range, even if you did get blocked, your opponent doesn't necessarily get to start hitting buttons again themselves.
will do my best.
Honoka has a strength against Elliot that is hard for most people to measure. She can dash out of a lot of things and still get full punishes, and she can block other things and still get full punishes. Meaning that technically, Honoka gets to zone Elliot. It's not the easiest of things to do consistently because Elliot can always do the other thing we were mentioning, get in and then chip down with supplemental damage. But Honoka's damage is so high in most situations that life leads aren't real, so you don't really care. You care about being chipped down to very, very low and then a very creative opponent managing to find a way to get the last hit. But even this is not a last hit situation. In supplemental damage terms, it takes 3 more hits for Elliot to win this. And with 3 seconds on the clock, it's less likely they're going to happen. On top of that, most zoners don't deal at all well with getting zoned out and timed out. Some of them are very consistent with it and accept the loss, but it takes mammoth amounts of patience for most people to realize that they have not won by zoning, and now their opponent is running away, and their character doesn't have the tools to do much about that, as they were built to do the opposite way. This is less a order strategy thing and getting into psychology again, which isn't something you generally want to do too much of when in zoning matches. But it is important because if you're trying to teach a zoner friend much, it's fairly important that they come to an understanding that the thing they're doing isn't in itself annoying. Zoning is annoying to people who really, really can't help but want to go in. But you do get to show them that it's psychologically difficult to not do that, which is helpful in 2 ways. It helps them understand why people do those things and how to cause them to keep doing them, and helps them understand what tells there are emotionally for someone who has decided, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm fine. That, for example, was predictable. That was predictable 10 seconds ago. Not because Elliot is specifically incapable of doing that, but because I have super. The only thing you can do about my super is hold it or break hold it. Therefore, you don't get to take an action. You have to get me to take one and then be ready. Meaning that Elliot's options are reduced entirely to stuff that is so fast that the super wouldn't hit. And since supers are invincible, unlikely. Tina also has a decent option when it comes to this, but it's not one of her more obvious options. Tina has a specific type of, let's call it shooting peach, that is easily sidestepped, easily punished, and only really works when you've gotten the opponent against a wall for various reasons. Not because they can't sidestep it or punish it, but because you can vary so much in how effectively they can block it. It isn't a move that they just block and everything's fine. Normally what happens is that she hits it, they stagger, and then they're out of range for stuff. If you've made sure that they don't stagger very far because there's nowhere for them to go, it's beneficial again. The reason this helps against Elliot as a character is that it gives Tina the option to send Elliot flying instead, and forces a lot of, oh, I don't know what you're doing. Even at that range, I have to hit buttons. which is super helpful for setting up whiff punish throws. There you go. You can see a lot of that situation come up. Her kicks also work for it, but mostly the throws are better. Getting far away and then making Elliot feel, well, I'm not safe at this range, I gotta hit something and get here, means that Tina gets a lot more options, both in terms of her throws and her kick timings. Learning to zone zoners is super important in 3D games, because unlike 2D games where they will just use a certain option to consistently come out on top of that, here they have to think about how they're going to reset the situation if they don't have the life lead yet. With Cosmic Wolf, generally we should assume that the amount of patience there when being zoned is actually fairly low. Most zoners don't actually like being zoned. They like having zoning face-offs, zoning wars with other zoners, but they don't like being zoned by characters that have these options, because they're too aware that getting in close wrong will lead into exactly what the other player wants, rather than some test of skill on part of zoning versus zoning. Because at some point you can just switch, you can just flip and turn back on your I'm going in now, time for big damage, and the zoner's mindset isn't necessarily going to switch as fast. So being able to have zoning as your backup mindset against a zoner means that they can't tell when you're randomly going to change to suddenly pressuring them again, going in super hard, or causing them pressure-based stresses of some kind. So they're constantly faced with, should I zone harder? Do I need to get in here? Which mode am I in? And because they don't have to practice this as much, the problem recurs.
Great match.
Fortunately for Elliot, he has a lot of good tools for this. He gets to not just be a one-trick pony in the zoning department, and can actually keep on doing different things long enough to make the opponent think about it. To approach and then do a retreating kick is one of the strongest things basically ever. In fact, it is so strong that most zoning characters in most games have this option. Base control characters like Dalsim and Street Fighter tend to not have it because that would just be ridiculous. But even characters who spend most of their time throwing projectiles often have a sort of retreating kick, or a kick that covers so much space that you have to block it but then can't do much afterwards. So simply going, well, I'll just counter zone Elliot, is nowhere near as easy as saying that you're going to counter zone... Who else is the other zoner in this game? I guess you can play Ayane enough so that you could say you can just counter zone Ayane whenever you want to. Which is why she runs up and grabs you. But I guess there's a lot of requirement of understanding of other characters in this game to know for sure. And if you're not a fan of 2D games in general, you don't tend to get the concept of zoners as strongly in these ones. But we're back to, am I going to stop hitting buttons? Probably not, no. And once again, this is the correct way for Hitomi to do this. Eventually, she may want to change it if Bayman starts to actually respond. But it's all about psychology. If the player thinks that they can find a way out of it, or they're the type of player who just tries to hold things and you can convince them that they need to do that, it's not going to work. Because there's not enough ways to be sure when it comes to Hitomi. And there's that moment of feeling, okay, I've definitely got the hold now. Which is exactly the same moment that Hitomi decides to not do that and end up throwing you, so terrible things happen. Bayman's options for this are simply flatly too slow for the purpose. Making this one of the most annoying beginner matchups possible, because you generally do end up feeling like you don't ever get to stop your opponent from hitting buttons. And it's hard to explain to people that the core problem was actually that they ever got close enough to hit them. Even in that situation, you see a larger reflection of how this works. Running up and delaying your button is more important than throwing, because the opponent is ready to tech the throw, but they're not ready for you to stand there and do nothing for half a second. Because that moment where they flinch and go away, is it my turn? And then you punch them in the face, is the purpose of that sort of run-up.
What I need is strength. I'll end this quick.
That leaping punch is one of Bayman's greatest options in this matchup, and the stomping kick doesn't hurt either. Diego tends to stand at a range where neither of those moves is strictly reactable. However, Diego's 4P solves a lot of problems, which at least helps out. A lot of the timings that Bayman wants to get in to do are covered by either 4P or 6P, I believe it is. One of those two things is going to hit. Now you can't tell necessarily which one, but one of them will hit. And that simplifies the situation for Diego, because as a character, it's I want to punch you. I'm not sure which punch to use, but I get to punch, so you do you. Bayman's answer to this is, well, I'll just hold, except that the 4P is a high hold, so you don't actually get the option of this. You have to guess which hold to do just as much as Diego has to guess which punch to do, which means you don't really get advantage. And on top of all that, Diego kind of wants you to hold because then throws will happen. The biggest problem for both characters in this matchup is when to use the super correctly. It's usually in a scramble situation when one has put the other at a long range and don't know what to do. But there, for example, is what happens with the throw height. Same thing that happens with the punch height. Do I stand up? Do I crouch? I don't know. You will see that even in relatively high level play, because that moment where those two are that close to each other, neither wants to stop, both want to grab, and both of them use, for their fastest buttons, highs that the other could duck under, so there's no way to know what to do at all. And that is good reason for super.
strength. That's
Last discussion on this was Diego blocks a lot. Mostly what you're looking for in the minute sense, therefore, is how many things does Honoka have to do before Diego is no longer in a good range for Honoka to keep attacking. It's usually a lot of things, but that moment does come. You just got to see it on the crouching punch. But most important thing to understand from Diego's side is this is not about gaps. If you think there is a gap here so I can do something, usually that gap has been set up by the Honoka player. The gap does not have to do with how long they took to do the next attack, but rather if they were trying to open you up, so you have to convince them this is necessary. And then, how far did they push you? Which is why you don't generally want to be cornered. Those of you who are familiar with Omni Rabbit's other characters can probably see how this works out. That looked like an execution drop though.
What? Does it really hurt that much?
The consistent problem with really large lounges that you didn't arrange as a group. I mean, obviously we did, but anyone who joins it then realizes that how long they have to wait before they can play. We do eventually change out of loser stays on lobbies when most people are done with the third order strategy part. Mainly because the game's not very fun playing in winner stays on when your opponent does the same thing repeatedly to win, and then when you eventually learn it, have to deal with that too. Unless you're past the two of them, you probably have some stressors, and it makes it harder to learn anything, because you don't get to play it. So, one of the hopes is to get through everyone's up to third order on at least the characters that we know. Until then. Diego also has enough throw range to do similar things to Tina. Yeah, I know you're going to swing at me to keep me from doing this, but I'll just throw you once you miss. On top of that though, Diego does have another useful option. His 1P, I think it is, actually has enough range and enough height manipulation to deal with a lot of things Elliot does. And it doesn't actually extend his hurt box that far, meaning that Elliot tends to do things that still miss. Basically, most of the reason we have trouble getting in on Elliot as a character is simply that, hey, if you extend forward your strike to the point where you could actually hit Elliot, most of the time he'll counter it. But since Diego isn't really trying to do that, he's just moving. He's just causing Elliot to see something happen on the screen. It tends to work out a little better. This is something that comes up in games a lot, and it's not one of the most popular concepts. To hit a button just so that you're moving, just so that your opponent who is looking for stuff sees something, because it increases their stress level mentally. You can see that there's already a slight change here. Elliot wants to react to things, but now an opening has occurred because he doesn't just want to react to any movement, which in turn changed what was before a simple reaction, oh you moved, let me kick you, to oh you moved, which move was that? And those are 4 frames different. That is the study of humanity. It will take 4 frames of time for you to make a decision on how to react to something. Most people, by, I believe the last study was 12 frames for just, I know what's going to happen, I just need to do it, and 16 frames for which of those 2 things again? At minimum. Therefore, just hitting another button slows down your opponent's reaction time by 4 frames. The thing about Diego's 1P is that it's actually one of the buttons least likely to make the opponent think that there's a threat. And this helps a lot in this flow. It helps, of course, even on top of that, that if it does hit even a little bit, you get to go basically into, what is it? His shoulder tackle, he can do at least 1 throw, I don't remember which throw, and some other punch becomes available. Elliot's options against this move are not the greatest, leaving that moment open of, okay, well, you don't want to react, so I get to punch you with my longer punch now because you're not going to react to it. Add on to all that, one of the deeper aspects of this game, and all fighting games, that if you can stall an opponent who isn't sure of themselves long enough, they'll eventually lose due to time pressure alone. But yes, they are spending all their time trying to think, how do I deal with this problem? Oh wait, I randomly got hit by something else, but they're back to the same thing. And by the time they've realized that 50 seconds have passed, they can't catch up in the life lead anymore, so the situation just completely falls apart for them. From Diego's side, obviously, this is not super simple. There's a bunch of little things Diego wants to do and needs to do that don't get covered by just one punch or the other punch. Which is good, because otherwise this would be a really boring matchup for Elliot. It would be a potentially losing one, but you can definitely see how certain matchups can be both losing and boring. In fact, you wouldn't even have to have this argument with most OG players of fighting games. They grew up on Street Fighter 2, where many matchups are both losing and boring.
Great match.
chance to run away. I will give it my all. Let's start.
So we're back to uppercut land. But again, remember, we had actually gotten to the third order before, at the point where the uppercut stops happening, and the thing that the uppercut is preventing stops happening. Not because it's entirely bad to do either one. A couple of random uppercuts in neutral doesn't generally hurt Hitomi much, especially at the beginning of the round. And occasionally trying, in case the opponent isn't likely to react in time to uppercut, works out well for Ayane. But it's important to note that when you don't have that option, when the move you want to use is definitely reactable, and you haven't managed to completely mentally overwhelm your opponent, the fact that it's the first order strategy usually means that they will have practiced it to the point where they just react, their body just does it. Hence the previous thing before. To get to a certain level of Street Fighter, as mentioned, you have to Shoryuken on certain characters. Meaning that basically anyone who is past that level, you should assume that nearly every time you jump, they're going to Shoryuken. It doesn't matter really, unless you've massively overwhelmed their cognitive state, that they shouldn't be ready for it, or maybe it will work this time, or they were thinking about something else. It's quite often their eyes saw you leave the ground, they know your character doesn't have a whole bunch of stuff that they need to use to prevent you from doing this, so their body will do the uppercut for them. Just like real martial arts, you will just automatically do the correct thing. You can train the body to do that.
How is my fighting? Want to do it again?
One of the main reasons that this makes this part of the matchup difficult for a zoning Ayane is that zoning is removed as an option for almost everything. But moving to the correct space doesn't give Ayane a large advantage. Hitomi doesn't really have a big one either, but she does get to pressure for a very long time. Players who are used to this will defend their way out of it, and players who are not used to it will get stressed in one way or another. But we moved back to Bayman, who doesn't really have the same options. Definitely not a pressure character by most standards. Meaning that we're more likely to see the same things we saw before. I will, however, make some notes if the stage is different enough to cause a specific option to become available to Bayman.
Another ninja.
Not this time.
Let's see how strong you are.
One of the largest evolutions you need to make against any player who is zoning well is the confidence to walk forward in specific ways while still not changing your mindset toward actually, I'm going to attack. You walk forward with the entire intention of holding yourself in the state to react and taking up the space until they can't walk backward anymore. A very important lesson. Because if you start thinking about how you can hit them, you will almost always lose the ability to react in time. Again, just a human brain thing. This isn't to say that you won't have an opportunity to hit them, or that you shouldn't ever think about it, but honestly, you're just as well off letting your mind pick randomly what to use for your option for trying to land the hit. Scheming how to get through it means that you're probably not as unpredictable as you'd like to be anyway. If you're the type that always hits the same button, that might be bad. But most of us don't. Given enough time, you can have your mind basically running in the background what you should hit if you actually got close enough, especially since it's already in a mental state of, oh, maybe I should be doing this defense thing. Which scrambles up your offensive thoughts a lot. The problem with DOA that you're already seeing is something different. If you do land a hit in that state, often the opponent didn't actually take a counter hit, so they could hold. This is not entirely impossible all the rest of the time. I've learned that in this game, you can actually hold out of certain states that were more difficult in older games. But the bigger problem, because I got derailed, is that if you've landed a hit, you often think you can continue the combo. Or you'll just automatically continue the combo. Except that your opponent knows this combo, was already calm, and probably was already thinking about defense. So it's a relatively small context switch for them to jump from, oh, I needed to hold that, to I need to hold the second hit of that. Reducing or entirely removing any combo follow-ups you get. But because you were already focused on your own reactions and defense, you're not likely to get much. You can try making yourself throw, but for a lot of characters that doesn't do anything else better, and you get teched when you try. This mostly is about mindset. If you're the type of person who's constantly cycling through random options and random combos, or whose characters require so many of them that you've just built that into your automatic play, you're a lot better off with this. But a character like Bayman, who basically does one combo out of every single hit he has, it might be a different combo per hit, but you hit with this button, this follow-up, this button, this follow-up. It's fairly easy to hold when they do manage to land the approaching hit in that quiet moment in neutral. Which means that you can, as the opponent, take in a fairly advanced option of,
This is your last chance to run away.
I should probably just not do anything. Just stand there, let him hit me, and then hold the thing that comes after the hit because I know how to hold that. And I could probably tech the throw, so it's fine. We're back to Honoka semi-zoning, but this is a different type of thing than what is done against Elliot. Because Ayane has enough reach and enough forward movement that it's not a matter of, okay, you've attacked once, your attack whiffed or failed, so I'm fine. There is more, which attack is this? How long will this continue? Fortunately, Omni Rabbit in specific is good at this, so there's not a lot of worry there from that side, but definitely other players will face more trouble. Because identifying the differences between Ayane's various buttons can be very difficult, and in some cases she actually has so many options that it doesn't matter. This is the stage I was speaking about before, by the way, that would give Bayman additional options. Down slams in this stage, true down slams, allow your character to juggle on lighter characters. This isn't you hit your opponent and they fell over, this is you hit them head downward with a kick usually, and therefore you get to do something. One of Ayane's difficulties against Honoka is in fact that she keeps on coming forward so much. With most other characters, Ayane can wait for someone to eventually reach the end of their string and whiff punish them. But Honoka players have a lot of options to just go, okay, well, you're backing off, but I can keep coming at you forever, so it's fine. And because she has at least enough options that you can't be sure whether she will punch or kick, if you wanted to say, stand there, bait them into continuing and then hold it, you have a little bit more work to do. Ayane does, however, have both a backflip and a specific type of forward flip. Her forward flip is not as good as Kasumi's in the same space, but it's usually enough to make the opponent think about whether or not they'll keep on coming forward. Since if they committed to coming forward, they're unlikely to defend against that properly. We're not sure how much longer we're going. You'll notice players drifting out, probably, if you wanted to get your chance. Depending on who stays and who leaves, who you wanted to fight. Now is a good time to join in. It's most likely not going to be more than half an hour, regardless of anything else. We are back to 1P and sort of blocking. But the stage is a little bit harder on both players now, leading to the first order and second order strategies getting pushed around a bit. Diego can definitely still hit 1P a lot, and Elliot can still zone in basically the same ways. But what's likelier to happen, because of the smaller stage, is that Diego won't be able to easily reposition in order to mess with Elliot's zoning, and Elliot therefore should technically zone less. Understanding this means that Diego should probably expect to be able to punch more. That's the main adaptation you make in those situations. If a situation in the game prevents your third order strategy from being as effective, it means your opponent knows this and is likely to shift their own flow, and your first order gets back some of its timing. Because there's always a matter of switching the two around until you feel comfortable. But sometimes, if you were comfortable a particular way, there are external factors, especially in 3D games, that change the entire thing. So here, for example, Diego could just switch to first order strategy only. I'm going to punch you from relatively far away, repeatedly. What will happen as a result of this? You can't be sure, but it's not necessarily going to be worse or better than doing the 1P. Because the 1P relies on having somewhere to go to, being misleading, all of these things that for now are difficult because of the size of the stage. Knowing that, obviously Elliot wants to change some things as well, but It's a little harder to explain that way.
Great match.
So that will probably come to another stream, how to deal with that. That looks like it's going to be lots of lag. Probably. Which is strange because it looked good before. Oh well. Depending on if they decide to hang around, we might end up with a relatively forced ending of the functionally useful part of stream. But we've seen these turn out to be decent before, somehow. This game's specific idea of how to do netcode means that everything slows down, and we usually get to do something with it. We get to talk it through. Talk about things, but we don't generally get much out of the actual playing. Fortunately, we've gotten a match with our player most interested in doing that sort of thing, specifically understanding and willing to play in slow motion. But will it be slow motion? Because again, that was only minor. Now it looks like the connection is back to normal, so yeah, okay. The few times I've mentioned this character, it was noting that, hey, wait a minute, this is the Colleen. Maybe. And she has all of the resolute problems that go with a Colleen type character. You never know what to do ever, and you don't get to play footsies. Hitomi thankfully has a solution to this. She can block almost everything Marie Rose does, punch once and then throw. This is almost consistent because while Marie Rose absolutely wants to hit more and more buttons forever, blocking causes the same problem as with Honoka. Eventually she will put herself at a space where she doesn't get to do something else. And she nearly never has any good crouch options. So you're waiting to watch for that spot, and then just punch. Just punch, nothing else. Just stand punch. Aside from that, you can stand and leave play zoning and similar, but if you find yourself blocking, just block and block, block some more, and then stand punch. The crouching kick also works, but the crouching kick has no follow-up, so you are kind of hoping that it hits and then you don't get messed up. As you can see, her throws are also not that devastating, and they don't tend to mess with you harder in the corner either, making the whole thing kind of a mess. However, it looks like it was at least laggy enough to make that difficult.
Even the small?
On the other hand, they won, so unless they hang around for someone else to circle around, it might not matter. Always, always remember that when you're practicing fighting games, knowing what to do is not the same as being able to do it. Even if it seems really simple, the result of training a long time to do something means that you've automatically lessened your chance of doing something else under pressure. Your body will do what it is trained to do, even when you are completely consciously aware that that is not the correct thing to do right now. But we rotate once again to Bayman versus Hitomi, I will see if the wolf can, in this case, find a way around the consistent punching. Again, this is more so about learning to hold, but it's about holding very early into things. Fortunately, Hitomi is not a super complicated character in that regard. It's similar to the Diego problem. Do you hold mid or do you hold high? But one way or another, you can almost always block once, tap enough to backdash, and then go for your hold. Sometimes you don't even have to worry about it not working because the hold is actually needed to be faster than that and it won't matter. Bayman benefits from this for other reasons as well, so there may be some ways out of the pressure part if we get to the pressure part. Because remember, the whole point was Bayman really doesn't want to be there in the first place. So situations that avoid getting there are good. The timing is less consistent when Hitomi manages a kick, but it's also not one you care about at that point. Her kicks, while damaging and stressful, if you happen to block them, you do have an opening. You do get to hit things. Your main problem is more so that her lows will eventually get you, but you don't really care that much all the time. You care on this floor, probably not on this. It's very important to know the differences when you end up in positions like this one. And it's meant to put a little bit of spice into the game to have the exploding floor and the exploding car or whatever else. Something additional to think about outside of just, oh, this is a basic stage that I know exactly what to do in. But mostly it's just spice literally in the sense that it increases the damage of the player who has enough mental capacity to recognize what's happening. One thing it does definitely do though is that it helps Hitomi specifically. She's one of the few characters whose low is such a sweep that you end up bouncing off the floor in this sort of situation, which is really helpful. It effectively gives her the equivalent of a new move by being in this zone. And that takes us far away from the order of third order strategies onto other much more complex parts of the game. This is also why they allow you to just turn danger zones off, because it can in fact have such effects. Yep, we're already reduced. I won't say this is the last stream match, but maybe the second last. Also not one I'm likely to have a lot to say in. we can just enjoy the Bayman Honoka face off, and I keep on doing that to their names today. What if I do that every stream?
All right. I will do my best.
I'll end this quickly.
Lots of experimentation this match, and probably a match I should have chosen to say something in. Because there's always the option for someone to go, I don't think this is a bad idea in this matchup, I'll try this button. And it turned out to be really effective, at least for a short time. But it seems to have gone away, therefore I probably didn't need to bring it up. Maybe next week, because we are very likely to have another SixyTimes Lounge next week, same time.
Promise me you won't tell anyone.
Yeah, let's go for it. Last on-stream match of the night. I can't guarantee how much longer the lounge will continue, if at all. But the stream will almost certainly end. And the person that joined didn't end up sticking around anyway.
I challenge you.
Are you here to take me out?
Another one of those situations that comes up if you're patient enough. Making the other person realize that, wait, I'm the one that has to do all the work, can be a really good advantage against someone who is not necessarily so patient themselves. This stands even when you are not at the life lead. Please remember this, because if you have any faith whatsoever that you can get it, just avoid making your opponent's life lead bigger. If they have a small life lead, but no way to do any damage to you, and you figure within the last 20 seconds you can manage to land like one hit to give yourself the life lead, then you've won. You don't have to do anything. You might fail it, but you're definitely going to be no better off than if you actually tried to do something. One of the things that's important in this game is therefore being able to tell how much health you've got. Right here, for example, is heavily advantaged to Bayman, because with 10 seconds left, Bayman needs to land one hit. He has a lot better options for landing his one hit than Elliot does, and therefore Bayman has advantage. This is even more true when you only have a slight life lead of your own, because feeling that your opponent is going to come in and suddenly grab you and get their own, it means you can go on the offensive a little before that time. Because most likely, if you mess up your offense and they don't punish correctly, or can't punish correctly because your offense is basically punish proof, there are such things, then you've just bought yourself so much time that you could go on a retreat then, and they wouldn't catch you because their mindset would have moved toward, oh, I need to defend, and they'll miss the moment. Right there, for example. Dropping your combo in that situation doesn't have a meaning in terms of tactics, strategy, or even specifically skill. You might be able to question, did I let myself get too stressed by all this thinking? Or, do I need to practice that particular combo more? But overall, you can just sometimes go, it happens, especially if you're not terribly practiced at it. A lot of fighting zoners is actually about watching the health bar and understanding how to manipulate life leads, because they're the one who has to put in all the effort in thinking about, okay, do I need to hit this button? Are they close enough yet? Do I need to do this or that? You're the one who gets time to stand there and think about whether or not your health is the correct amount for this win. But with that, we've come to the end of our stream. The lounge may stay open a little bit, but again, on Monday for Mishmashing with Street Fighter V, and next Thursday for another SixyTimes Battle Lounge. Good luck with your training, and good night, everyone.